The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon filled pies hit me the moment I stepped into my mother-in-law's house. It should have felt comforting, like stepping into warmth after a long, cold week. Instead, my stomach twisted. Thanksgiving had always been one of those holidays I imagined as perfect: the laughter, the clinking of glasses, the shared stories. But tonight, I felt like a guest in someone else's life. I tried to smooth my sweater and take a deep breath, reminding myself that I was here for my son. That was my only reason. The table was set perfectly, every utensil aligned like a miniature army, the candles flickering just enough to make everything seem cozy. My husband, Daniel, gave me a small, reassuring smile from across the room. He squeezed my hand, his thumb brushing over mine lightly. "It'll be fine," he whispered. I wanted to believe him. I really did. My son Jacob skipped ahead, full of energy and excitement. He wore the little vest Daniel had picked out for him, his hair slightly messy from the excitement of seeing the pies. He ran around the chairs, humming a song he'd just learned in school. Watching him, I felt a warmth spread through me, a quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, we could have a peaceful evening. And then she entered the room. My mother-in-law. The shift was instantaneous. Her heels clicked sharply against the hardwood floor, announcing her presence. She carried herself like a queen in her own court, every movement measured, every glance deliberate. And when she looked at Jacob, the warmth I had felt moments ago evaporated completely. "He's cute," she said slowly, her words dripping with that unmistakable tone that always made me feel like I was being measured and found lacking. "But he's not really family, is he?" The words hit like a sudden chill. I froze, unsure if I'd heard her correctly. My son paused mid-step, his small hands gripping the back of a chair, looking up at her with wide, innocent eyes. "Mom, please," Daniel said softly, trying to bridge the tension. I felt his fingers brush my arm again, but this time his reassurance seemed fragile, as though he didn't quite know how to protect either of us from her. Her gaze shifted to me, sharp, scrutinizing, the kind of look that could strip you bare without a single touch. "I just think maybe some things shouldn't be forced. Some people don't belong in certain families," she added, her words perfectly timed for maximum effect, calculated. I felt my chest tighten. I had anticipated the usual subtle judgments, the occasional snide remarks about my career, my clothes, or my cooking. But this was different. It wasn't just a judgment, it was a declaration, one that positioned my son as an outsider in the family he was born into. The room fell into an awkward silence. Some of the relatives shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to intervene. A few laughed nervously, as if masking their own discomfort with humor, and Jacob's lips quivered slightly, and he glanced at me with confusion and fear. That innocent, trusting look in his eyes broke me more than her words ever could. I felt the heat rise to my cheeks, a mix of anger, shame, and heartbreak. For a brief moment, I considered defending myself, defending my son, raising my voice to match the audacity of hers. But I stopped, I breathed, I reminded myself that this was not a moment for hysteria, not a moment for angry words that would linger and be dissected for weeks. Instead, I watched, I observed, I let the silence stretch. And in that quiet, I noticed things I had never paid attention to before. The slight tightening of my husband's jaw, the way some cousins avoided my gaze, the faint tremor in her hand as she reached for her wine glass. There were cracks, subtle, almost invisible, but undeniable. In that moment, I realized that tonight I would not give her the satisfaction of an immediate reaction. I would not let my anger or hurt define the evening. I would hold myself together for Jacob, for me, for the quiet dignity that comes from knowing your worth, even when others refuse to see it. I glanced at my son and knelt down to whisper, "It's okay, sweetie, I'm right here." He nodded, his small hand gripping mine. and in that simple gesture, I felt a quiet surge of determination. This night would be hard, it would test me, but I was beginning to understand something crucial. Sometimes the most powerful response is not immediate confrontation, but calm observation, steady presence, and an unwavering heart. And so we sat down at the table, the candles flickered, the room buzzed with laughter and murmured conversations. But I felt something else growing quietly inside me, a resolve that tonight, and every night after, I would protect my son's place in this world, no matter how loudly others tried to deny it. After that first unbearable sentence, the room tried to carry on as if nothing had happened. The clinking of silverware against plates, the low hum of casual conversation. It all felt artificial, a fragile veil over the tension that had settled like smoke in the air. I watched my mother-in-law carefully, studying the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, the way her hand lingered over her wine glass a fraction too long. She had delivered her verdict, and now she expected the room to dance around it, pretending it wasn't cruel. I glanced at Jacob. He sat quietly, twirling a fork in his small fingers, avoiding everyone's gaze. His usual sparkle, the one that could light up a room, was dim tonight. My heart ached. I wanted to scoop him up and disappear, to leave this house and all of its judgment behind. But I didn't. I stayed because he needed me to stay. And because, deep down, I knew that walking away now wouldn't prove anything, wouldn't give us the dignity we deserved. Some of the relatives chuckled nervously at my mother-in-law's comment, trying to fill the silence with humor. But it wasn't funny. Her words had stripped the warmth from the room, and their laughter felt hollow. I caught a few sidelong glances, one cousin's mouth tightening into a thin line, another's hand curling around a wine glass like they were trying to hold themselves steady. Everyone was uncomfortable, yet no one said a word. That realization hit me harder than the insult itself. My son was being excluded, and the adults around us were complicit through silence. I kept my hands folded on my lap, my breathing steady. I told myself that whatever I did next would have to come from a place of quiet strength, not reactionary anger. The first impulse was to snap, to confront her, to protect Jacob from the emotional sting she had just inflicted. But I felt a flicker of something else, something more powerful than immediate outrage. I felt clarity. I understood, in that moment, that strength didn't always need to shout. Sometimes it could reside in calm observation, in knowing exactly when to act and when to wait. I remembered all the times I had been gentle, trusting, even forgiving in the past, the times I had assumed people meant well when they didn't. I thought of the subtle dismissals, the passive-aggressive remarks, the hidden competitions that had followed me from family gatherings in my own childhood into this marriage. Patterns revealed themselves when you were willing to watch closely. My mother-in-law had always used charm as armor, kindness as camouflage, while she manipulated her image with precision. This wasn't new. It was just sharper tonight because my son was the target. Dinner continued. The turkey was carved, the mashed potatoes passed around, and I moved through the motions of conversation, answering polite questions about work and school. I could feel the unspoken judgments flickering beneath every smile. Each laugh, each murmured, "Isn't he adorable?" carried a weight, a question of legitimacy. My chest tightened, and yet I stayed seated. I watched and listened, and with every passing minute, I felt a quiet confidence growing. I began to see her cracks more clearly, the impatience when someone disagreed, the slight stiffening in her posture when someone observed her too closely, the way her smile faltered when she thought she was being watched. I realized that while she tried to control the narrative tonight, her power depended entirely on the room staying silent, on people not speaking up. And in that realization, I felt something shift inside me. The anger that had flared initially softened into a calm determination. I didn't need to prove her wrong immediately. I didn't need a confrontation fueled by emotion. I only needed to hold my place, to protect Jacob's dignity, and to wait for the right moment to respond not with fury, but with truth. At one point, Jacob leaned slightly against me, whispering, "Mom, why does she say that about me?" His voice was small, filled with confusion and hurt. I stroked his hair, pressing a gentle kiss to his temple. "Sweetheart," I whispered back, because sometimes people forget to see what really matters, but I see you. I always will. He relaxed slightly, trusting me in a way that gave me strength. In that quiet trust, I felt the first spark of my own resilience. This was no longer just about surviving her words or her laughter. It was about quietly, deliberately cultivating my own emotional power, about standing firm, even in the face of others' cruelty. And so I sat at the table, smiling politely, nodding when needed, while inside I planned. Not a plan of confrontation, not of revenge, but a plan of observation and timing. I would not let her define Jacob's worth. I would not allow her illusions of control to shape our reality. The room's laughter continued, forced and uneven, but my heart had begun to steady. The betrayal had been delivered, the pain had arrived, and yet, somewhere beneath the surface, something else had begun to grow. Quiet strength, careful wisdom, and the knowledge that one day, truth, simple, undeniable, dignified truth, would speak for itself. The dinner had settled into an uneasy rhythm. Conversation hummed around me, punctuated by polite laughter and occasional clinking of glasses, yet the weight of her words lingered like a shadow over the table. My mother-in-law had delivered her verdict, and the room had played along awkward smiles, forced nods, and stifled murmurs, but her statement had done its work. Jacob had shrunk slightly into his chair, a child instinctively sensing he was being judged, excluded, and misunderstood. I could feel every eye on me at one point, or at least I imagined it. Perhaps it was my heightened awareness, the way parents focus on their children when something feels wrong. Every glance, every whispered exchange, every subtle movement around the table seemed like a calculation to measure my reaction. Some relatives avoided my gaze altogether, as if by not looking at the situation, they could pretend it didn't exist. Others whispered quietly to each other, clearly wondering how I would respond. I took a slow, steady breath. My first instinct, like it always had been, was to defend, to shout, to argue, to assert that my son belonged here, that he was family, that her words were cruel. But I held myself back. I remembered every family gathering that had left me feeling powerless. Every moment when speaking up in anger had only escalated tension or given her the satisfaction of conflict. I had learned, sometimes painfully, that calm observation, patience, and careful timing carried more weight than any shouted defense. I looked at Jacob again. His small fingers traced the edge of his plate, his brows furrowed in confusion. He trusted me, and that trust was a responsibility heavier than anything else in the room. My mother-in-law, with her measured smile, her perfectly polished nails, and her quiet satisfaction, wanted a reaction from me, something that would confirm her power, affirm her narrative. I refused to give it. Instead, I waited. I watched the subtle cracks in her composure, the slight tightening of her jaw when she thought no one was paying attention, the way her hands shook imperceptibly as she reached for her wine glass. I observed the fleeting expressions on the other family members' faces, the slight discomfort, the tension, the realization that perhaps what she had said wasn't as clever as she believed. And in that silence, a plan formed, not one of vengeance, but one of dignity. I cleared my throat lightly. Not a shout, not a cry, not an accusation. Just a small, deliberate sound, enough to draw attention without raising my voice. And then, slowly, I spoke 6 words. 6 words that carried weight not because they were loud, but because they were calm, precise, and true. He is family, always to me. The effect was instantaneous. The room froze. Forks hovered midair. Wine glasses wobbled slightly in reluctant hands. The chatter died in a breath. Even my mother-in-law, poised as ever, felt the impact, her smile faltering like a fragile mask cracking under pressure. For a moment, no one spoke. No one dared interrupt the quiet that had settled over the table. Jacob blinked up at me, his confusion giving way to relief. A small, tentative smile appeared on his lips, the kind of smile that tells you your child feels safe again, that he knows he belongs, that his place in the world is secure because you are there. Hold it for him. I reached across and squeezed his hand gently. See, I whispered, you're not alone. I've got you. My mother-in-law's eyes narrowed slightly, searching mine for weakness, but she found none. My calmness was not surrender. It was presence, dignity, and quiet authority. She had expected me to break, to lash out, to give her control over my emotions. Instead, I had spoken with certainty, measured words that left no room for her manipulations to take hold. The tension lingered, heavy but now under my terms. I hadn't humiliated her, shouted, or demanded apologies. I had simply spoken the truth, allowed reality to assert itself, and in doing so, protected my son's dignity without compromising my own. The room slowly resumed its noises, some whispers, some polite laughter, but nothing felt the same. The power dynamic had shifted. Quietly, subtly, the truth had been laid bare. My son belonged, and I would never let anyone make him feel otherwise. I realized then that this evening, which had begun with humiliation and dread, had become a turning point. The betrayal was real, the pain was real, but the way I responded calmly, wisely, and with unwavering love had changed everything. I could feel my own inner strength solidifying, a quiet wisdom that told me I could face any subtle cruelty, any hidden manipulation, with the same dignity and calm I had mustered tonight. And most importantly, Jacob knew. He knew he was family, he knew he belonged, and in that knowledge we both found an unexpected peace, one that no words of malice could erase. The rest of the evening passed in a strange, measured silence. Dinner continued around us, yet nothing felt ordinary any more. The room seemed smaller somehow, the air heavier with unspoken acknowledgement. My mother-in-law avoided my eyes, her carefully curated composure fraying in subtle ways that only someone truly watching could notice. For the first time that night, I saw that her power, so long cultivated through sharp words and manipulative smiles, was fragile. It relied entirely on fear, uncertainty, and silence, and now those tools had failed her. Jacob sat beside me, quietly eating his mashed potatoes. He stole glances at me now and then, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corners of his lips. It was a smile full of relief, trust, and the quiet joy of feeling safe again. Seeing him, I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with pride or ego. It was simply a recognition that the love we shared had shielded him from harm. The evening had begun with humiliation, but it was ending in reassurance, calm, and understanding. I found myself observing the room differently than before. The relatives who had laughed nervously, the ones who had shifted uneasily in their chairs, the few who tried to look away, none of them could erase what had been spoken. The truth of belonging, of love and family, had been affirmed not with confrontation, but with clarity. My words had been few, but they carried weight. I realized then that emotional strength isn't always measured by volume. Sometimes it is measured by precision, restraint, and dignity. Daniel reached over, placing his hand lightly on mine. His eyes were filled with quiet admiration, respect that didn't need words. "You handled that perfectly," he murmured. I gave him a small, serene smile. "It wasn't about handling her," I replied softly. "It was about protecting him and myself." As dessert was served, I noticed my mother-in-law's subtle retreat. She spoke less, laughed less, and her sharp glances were replaced by brief, cautious observations. She had expected chaos, confrontation, or tears. What she got instead was quiet, unshakable composure. She realized, though she would never say it aloud, that her attempts to diminish my son and me had failed. Power shifted without a single raised voice. Control had been quietly reclaimed. After the last forkful was eaten and the final toast had been made, I rose from the table. Jacob followed, holding my hand. I looked around the room one last time, letting the silence settle fully. No words were needed. The energy of the evening had shifted, and it was palpable. I felt a quiet pride, not the kind born from defeating someone, but the kind that comes from knowing you have preserved your values, your dignity, and your child's sense of belonging. As we left the house, I held Jacob close. "You did so well tonight," I whispered. "You were brave." He smiled up at me, a mixture of shyness and relief. "I listened to you," he said softly. And in that simple sentence, I understood the most important lesson. The impact of quiet strength is often felt more deeply by those you love than by anyone else in the room. The car ride home was calm. The streets glimmered under the soft glow of the streetlights, and I found myself reflecting on the night. There had been betrayal, yes, and subtle cruelty, but there had also been growth, clarity, and a deepening bond between mother and child. I realized that boundaries are not set through anger, nor are they enforced through humiliation. They are maintained quietly, steadfastly, and with the unshakable knowledge of your own worth. By the time we pulled into our driveway, a sense of peace had settled over me. The night had tested me, revealed the fragility of some relationships, and exposed the hidden judgments lurking behind polite smiles. But it had also shown me that true strength isn't about making others fear you. It's about holding your ground, protecting those you love, and refusing to let someone else's opinions define your reality. As Jacob drifted off to sleep later that night, I sat quietly by the window, the soft glow of the streetlights casting gentle shadows across the room. I thought about how easily people underestimate the power of composure and truth. I thought about how silently observing, listening, and choosing when, and how to respond can be far more powerful than any outburst. And most of all, I thought about the future, about the small, deliberate ways I would continue to protect my son's sense of worth and belonging, and my own. For the first time that evening, I felt completely calm. The storm of humiliation had passed. We had not been defeated. We had not been diminished. We had been seen, and we had survived not through shouting, not through anger, but through dignity, wisdom, and unwavering love. And in that quiet victory, I understood something essential. Life will test your boundaries, your patience, and your strength, but how you respond defines not only who you are, but the legacy of calm resilience you leave for those who look to you for guidance, love, and protection.